And the latest from the Israel-Hamas war. Israel now says that it has now further expanded its ground operations in Gaza.
It is operating in multiple Hamas strongholds now, both in northern and the southern strip of Gaza.
As a result, the Gaza Strip continues to be under intense Israeli bombing.
אנחנו הנחינו את צה"ל להמשיך במלחמה. לוחמינו מרחיבים את הפעילות הקרקעית נגד חמאס בכל מקום ברצועה, כולל בדרום הרצועה.
The IDF says it has been operating in Hamas strongholds in the areas of Jabalia, Shujaiya and Khan Yunis, where it has destroyed militant infrastructure and eliminated Hamas militants.
As the Israeli offensive expands to southern Gaza, the city of Khan Yunis is particularly witnessing huge devastation.
IDF described the past day as the most intense day of combat in 5 weeks of ground operations against Hamas militants in what appeared to be the biggest ground assault in Gaza ever since the Gaza truce broke down. Israel said its troops, who were backed by warplanes, had reached the heart of Khan Yunis and also surrounded the city.
בחלוף 60 ימים מפרוץ הלחימה, כוחותינו מחתרים את מרחב ח'אן יונס בדרום הרצועה. אנחנו ממשיכים במקביל להעמיק את ההישג גם בצפון הרצועה.
Meanwhile, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group has released a video showing its militants fighting in Khan Yunis. The militants can be seen shooting guns and operating rocket launchers in the video.
The offensive also continues in northern Gaza. IDF has released a video showing Hamas' continued exploitation of civilian infrastructure in Gaza City. It shows how the Al-Shati camp in the city is being used by Hamas. IDF says schools and civilian buildings are used to launch rockets, store weapons and carry out attacks against Israel.
שמתקשרים דרך התת-קרקע אל כיוון הגנים בבתי הספר. נראה לנו כמו מקום תמים לחלוטין, שבפועל זאת עמדה לניהול לחימה. היה פה ממש חמ"ל בתוך המשרד של המנהלת, שבתוכו מנהלים...
And amid intense fighting, Hamas has ruled out negotiations. It clearly says that no further prisoner or hostage exchange will take place until Israeli strikes stop. Take a listen.
ونجدد هنا التأكيد أنه لا تفاوض ولا تبادل إلا بوقف العدوان على شعبنا وقطاع غزة الصامد الصابر. ونحمل هنا نتنياهو كامل المسؤولية عن حياة الأسرى والمحتجزين الصهاينة بسبب تعطيله استكمال صفقة التبادل واستئنافه للعدوان على غزة.
Israel has now revised the number of hostages that are held captive by Hamas to 138. Previously, Israeli officials had said that 137 hostages were still inside the Gaza Strip and included 20 women and 2 children. Israel has not provided the details concerning the 138th confirmed hostage or how Israeli authorities were able to verify their status.
On the other hand, the U.S. has taken a rare action against Israeli settlers. It is now imposing visa bans on people involved in violence in West Bank. The officials say that this has been done after several appeals for Israel to do more in a bid to prevent violence by the Jewish settlers. The visa restriction policy targets individuals who are believed to have been involved in undermining peace, security or stability in the West Bank, either by committing violent acts or actions that restrict civilians' access to essential services and basic necessities.
Today, as President Biden recently warned, the United States is taking action to address this escalating violence in the West Bank by implementing a new visa restriction policy under Section 212A3C of the Immigration and Nationality Act.
All right, WION's correspondent Susan Teherani sends us this report from New York on the recent and quite notable sanctions the US is levying on Israeli settlers now. Take a look.
Imposing sanctions against several dozen Israeli settlers demonstrates how concerned the Biden administration is of the possibility of the violence spilling over outside of the Gaza Strip and the White House's frustrations about how the Israeli government is simply not doing enough regarding these extremist settlers. The State Department also announced that a number of Palestinians will also be sanctioned. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, in a press briefing on Tuesday, said that some of their immediate family members may also be subject to these restrictions. But the news didn't come out of nowhere. About 2 weeks ago, in a Washington Post op-ed, President Biden said that the U.S. was planning to issue visa bans on extremist settlers, and it's not unprecedented that this has happened. However, it is the first time that the U.S. government is sanctioning Israeli extremist settlers since the Clinton administration.
And Susan further explains if the U.S. is shifting its stance on Israel at the moment. Take a listen.
The Biden administration has firmly backed Israel since the Hamas attack on October 7th. And on Tuesday, U.S. President Joe Biden strongly urged the international community to come together and condemn the abhorrent acts of sexual violence and rape against Israeli women on October 7th. But in recent weeks, the administration has also stepped up its calls for Israel to do all it can to limit civilian casualties. And while the U.S. has refrained from outright criticism in that regard, it has been more outspoken when it comes to extremist settlers in the West Bank. So much that just last week at the United Nations, U.S. ambassador to the UN also alluded to these calls.